You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.
Los Angeles, welcome back to the LA Football Show here on the LA Football Network, live on the Mightier 1090 ESPN Radio. This is your Rams segment as we get into this Rams-Packers game here momentarily on Monday Night Football. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Make sure to like and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts or on YouTube or on the website, LAFBnetwork.com. Show is always brought to you by our friends at BetOnline. Head to betonline.ag. Use the promo code BELIEVE for a 50% welcome bonus on your first time deposit. This could be a fun game to bet on. Who knows? But who would have thought that going into Monday Night Football in week whatever we are, 13, 14, that this game, Packers, Rams, would feature a 4-9 Rams team and a 5-8 Packers team. What once thought was going to be an NFC Championship preview now becomes a battle for moral victories, if you will. So joining me as always, the great Jamal Madney. Man, who would have thought we'd be sitting here, Jamal, talking about two sub 500, essentially, not mathematically yet, essentially eliminated teams from the playoffs with still 4 games to play. Who would have thought we'd be sitting here right now?
No, Ryan, certainly not me. And, I know we had talked offline about us potentially going to this game as one of the tailgates of the year for the Los Angeles Football Network and the opportunity for Rodgers versus Stafford and just everything that this game represents. And, Matt LaFleur and Sean McVay and the battle of two young geniuses in the NFL. And now here we sit, these two teams combined 9-17, and it's probably going to be Baker Mayfield versus Jordan Love. And we'll see how that plays out. So just when you think in the NFL, you don't know. But I think it's going to be a fun game regardless, Ryan, and how Baker Mayfield, now with 10 days under his belt after that dramatic victory against the Raiders in what was the game of the year for the Rams and the highlight of the year for the Rams in terms of Baker's opening start. Now with 10 days under his belt of preparation, of understanding offensive concepts, of getting comfortable with his weapons and the players around him, how does he build upon that first start, go into Lambeau in a December game, very difficult to play given the weather, and execute a game plan and hopefully get the Rams on top and get them to 2 games in a row as part of this larger audition for him, not just with the Rams next year, but with the NFL in terms of being able to find a credible starting quarterback role with one of the other 32 NFL teams. So it's a huge game for Baker. How much of this game is going to be more evidence that he is capable of being a starting quarterback in this league? Or is this going to be a game where it's a regression back to the mean, where in the cold weather, he starts doing some things that has gotten him in trouble over the last few years in terms of poor decision-making, being a bit of a gunslinger, getting loose with the football, and where that first game against the Raiders then starts becoming, that was just more of kind of an emotional sandlot game, and we have to sort of take Baker with a pinch of salt. So I think it's a huge game for Baker moving forward. I think it's a huge game, again, for these young receivers, the Van Jeffersons, the Tutu Atwells, the Powells. I think it's a big game for Cam Akers as he continuously, hopefully positively showcases his ability as a running back to be in some other roster in 2022. And then I think it's also just a big game for Sean McVay as he continues to sort of work through his decision-making and thinking about whether he wants to come back for 23 and give it another go, or he's ready to call it quits and be with his stunningly gorgeous Ukrainian wife and start building a family. So I think there's a lot of elements here of why this is such a big game for the Rams as we get into this final 4 games of the season.
Yeah, football and maybe sports in general. I mean, I'm compared to a sport, but it's a lot like golf, right? In a sense that if you're out on the golf course, you can have a horrible, horrible day. Triple bogeys, lost balls, all this. But you get that one birdie on 17 or on 16, and it just fires you up. It gets you wanting more. It gives you that false hope. That's kind of what that game last week was, Jamal. Like, it's been a rough Rams season. Lost 6 straight. McVay having to say the same things at the podium, like, yeah, we're working hard, like we're seeing the young guys play, but then you get that taste of victory and the way they won, which I want to get your thoughts on because we can get to talk about it since you were gone. The way they won, you saw how fired up Coach McVay was and how fired up this team was. And it's like, that's what if you're a Rams fan and you want McVay coming back next year, you need more of that because that's going to get that taste like that birdie on 17 where he's like, all right, I need to give it another go. Like that was fun. The way we won those last few games of the season, the way this team banded together. Now let's get everyone healthy. Let's make a few critical moves and let's have one more real go at this. But if they like lose out, I think a lot of people are like, he won't want to go out like that. Like you don't want that on your resume. But I think it'll more so be you just don't have that fiery taste anymore. Whereas a few good wins, you have that fire. Like, okay, let's run it back. Let's get this thing going right and then end on a high note. So obviously everyone's rooting anyway for this team to win. But if you want McVay back, I think you really need to root for him to win because I think that makes it more likely that he does come back. So funny thing about LaFleur, Jamal, and we talk all the time how we hate week-to-week narratives. Sometimes even season-to-season narratives are too much. And, the media nowadays, you always need stuff to talk about. It's all about hot takes, clickbait, whatever it is, just getting people to engage. And even if you're, all the main programs we've talked about this a lot just because I've talked to people that work for the networks. They're literally actors. Like yes, they were former athletes or yes, they're journalists at one time, but on those shows, they are actors. They're not even saying maybe what they truly believe. They were basically given a script to get people fired up.
Ryan, it's okay. You can say the terms Emmanuel Acho. We know what you're talking about.
He's one of them, but a lot of them. And I say that because the last 3 years or however long Matt LaFleur has been in Green Bay, he's been considered a top 5 coach. Every single year when they come out the coach rankings and they have like the elite category, he's in that elite category. He's in that top 5, 6 rank. And I've always thought, yeah, good coach, nothing against LaFleur, but I think a lot of that is probably one of the greatest quarterbacks we've ever seen rubbing off on him. A lot of that is Aaron Rodgers. Now, all of a sudden, they have their struggles, and he's on the top 5. When you look at betting odds, he's on top 5 coaches of getting fired this year. So it's like, it's so funny to me that one guy can go from top 5 elite coach status, and then in 1 year, hot seat getting fired. And so that tells you a lot about what the media does and what they talk about is they're just talking points week to week to week instead of looking at the overarching thing or even just watching the damn football games and what goes on. Like, okay, McFleur's a good coach, comes from the Sean McVay tree, comes from, I guess, the overarching Mike Shanahan tree, has some good concepts there, but he also has arguably the greatest quarterback to ever play the game. And that's probably a big reason why he's had so much success over these years. So I always just find that funny that a coach can go from elite to hot seat after one bad season. And I think it shows a lot about what our media talks about. It's crazy.
No doubt, Ryan. And, it's what makes the NFL such an EKG year over year, because when you look at the other sports, there is sort of an acknowledgement that the regular season is a feeder into the playoffs. And it's about kind of getting right for the playoffs. Like the NBA regular season is essentially one big, experiment of tinkering with health and schematics and just mentally getting right for the playoffs. And you don't feel this day-to-day, week-to-week narrative in the NBA because just the regular season of the NBA, the stakes are lower. When you look at baseball and when you look at now, 162 games, and now with the addition of these 3 wildcard teams, right now 6 make the playoffs baseball. So now there's more room. The margin for error is more. And again, that week-to-week narrative in baseball, just because there's so many games, it's hard to keep track of. College basketball really peaks in March. Everything is sort of leading into March. And I think college football is so now things will change with a 12-team playoff. But up until this point, it's so life or death every week that you're putting everything into it. The NFL is the only sport where there's margin for error. You can lose. Like we were talking in the segment, the Chargers 7-6. The Chargers have lost 6 times. But we're still in a position where they can make a great run and have everything in front of them. So there's still a margin for error in the NFL, but the ebb and flow of week to week is just so violent in the NFL. It borders the ridiculous, and how a guy can be a top 5 coach and then be top 5 fired in a matter of 8 months. I mean, did he just bash his head in with a metal pipe for 8 months? Like he's lost all his brain cells? No, the reality is that arguably the most talented player to ever play the position is the guy that he had an MVP form for the first 3 years. And that guy is, for a combination of father time and disinterest and not having the same rapport with his roster, now not quite the same guy this year. And that's probably what's happening. So, Ryan, I think it's always very interesting. It's why you and I try and maintain a more macroeconomic view of the NFL, and why I love doing this with you so much. And yes, to your earlier point in terms of the Baker game, you and I haven't had a chance to talk about that. And I must say, Ryan, that you and I both need to pat each other on the back, because you and I predicted exactly what was going to happen is what happened. Baker pulled out the magic and won the game. I was so excited. I was messaging you from Jackson, Wyoming, and I just couldn't believe it before my very eyes. From 16-3 down, Ryan, with 5:21 to play, to get those back-to-back touchdown drives, the last touchdown drive being 90-plus yards. Now, the Raiders did us what they always do. They raided it and gave us some great favors there with some personal fouls and some late hits and some off-ball penalties to extend drives and end drives for them. But we'll take the gifts when they come. And what a dramatic victory there. And that throw and catch to Ben Skro was absolutely phenomenal. And then just that dime to Van Jefferson with 9 seconds to go. It was the game of the year for the Rams. Baker Mayfield in one start created more excitement than Matthew Stafford did in 12 this year. That's how crazy this season has been.
Yeah, obviously this is the syndrome of living in the moment and needing to let it marinate a little bit. But I think there's some fortitude to this. Take out last year's playoff run, because all those games were amazing. Take out the Super Bowl, obviously. Take out the Monday night thriller Rams-Chiefs game. And I would probably say take out the Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins at the Collie, Vikings, Rams, Bobby Trees, YG in the stands. Take out that game. Take out those. This might be the most fun I've had at a Rams game outside of those. I mean, it was that electric, that exciting, and that fun to do it against the Raiders. Because like I've said before on shows, the Raiders are probably the most hated team if you're not a Raider fan of the other 31 fan bases, just because of Raider Nation, and they travel well and they're always whining and complaining and all this and saying they own LA and all this. So it was against the Raiders, which was great. And B, just everything that we've talked about, and it's been talked about ad nauseum now, the fashion of him being here for 48 hours and kind of just giving a spark in that last drive, and just how exciting it was. But man, it was so fun to see. So we could kind of end with this conversation then, because I talked about it a little bit without you, but obviously there was a lot of emotion in that game. Football is a sport of emotion, where a lot of times that's why they say any given Sunday, because lesser teams, lesser players can win, because it's a game built on emotion. And sometimes you just have that moment that someone rises up for and proceeds. Now that's hard to do over 17 games, over 24 games. If you make it to the Super Bowl, yada, 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 21 games. I'm horrible at math, 21 games. So seeing Baker do that, and obviously we'll see Baker start the rest of the year. It has been reported Walford not playing, so it is Baker for sure, which I don't think that was really a question, but now official. Is this something that he can sustain the rest of the year? Do you think because we just talked about Matt LaFleur, week-to-week narratives over this. We kind of know Baker a little bit. We talked about it before he got here about, he's had some good years. Everyone forgets, like, he led the Browns to the playoffs for the first time in however long. He's had some good seasons, put up some good yardage, and then unfortunately, end of last year, and then obviously this year with Carolina, just couldn't really get it together. But I mean, he was a first overall pick. He's not a bum. But at the same time, he's probably not on the Mount Rushmore of quarterbacks just based on one win against the Raiders. So what's kind of that margin for Baker that you see playing out the rest of these, 4 games for the rest of the season?
Ryan, it's going to be really interesting. And I think that Baker is one of those guys, and you and I have sort of talked about this comparison a lot this year in LA football, where we've compared Caleb Williams to DTR. And we've talked about Caleb being that cool customer, and his personality is suited for just consistency week over week, because he's this fiery competitor, but he knows how to keep it underneath the surface, and he knows how to be poised, a la Steph Curry, a la Pat Mahomes. And they just know when to, a la Roger Federer in tennis used to be like this, where you can be calm most of the time. You can let out your emotions in very sort of calculated, periodic ways. And that's how you build a season together. And when you think about DTR, he's like Russell Westbrook. He's like Kevin Garnett. He's like all of these guys where they feed off of the emotion. They need the emotion. They need the hate. They need the hostility. They need the chip on their shoulder. They need to be doubted to raise their level, that their natural disposition where they get optimal performances, not through calm, it's through chaos. And Baker is a little bit in the middle there with a little bit more of a leaning towards that DTR side, where Baker is an emotional guy. He needs the emotion to sort of play his best. And he did that in college with the flag, planting in that Ohio State game against Oklahoma with some of his comments. You remember that game with Oklahoma and Kansas, where like the Kansas guy refused to shake his hand at midfield, and you saw him starting to clap and go crazy, and OU ended up beating Kansas by like 50 in that game. So he needs that emotional element. And so I think for me, the evolution for Baker is not to eliminate the emotion, but how does he manufacture and harness emotion in an effective way? Because he needs it to play great, but he can't let it overwhelm him. And I think in spots in Cleveland and in Carolina, I think he's let it overwhelm him. I think he can sort of keep that emotion, because I think so much of the narrative this week is going to be along the lines of, was the game against the Raiders just a fluke and him coming down, and can he keep it up? So I think he can harness that in a good way. And I think week over week, if he can find the right emotional knobs to sort of to turn and keep it in a controlled way, I think he can put a really nice 4 or 5 games together. So I'm expecting him to play well. It's going to be hard in Lambeau with that weather. I expect him to make some mistakes. I think there's going to be an interception. I think there might be a fumble. I think he may get a little bit sloppy with the ball. But I think overall, I think he's going to play well, because I think there's still an emotional element of needing to prove himself to the greater NFL community.
Yeah. And last point on that. And I think, I talk a lot about how, yes, coaching matters in the NFL, but I think the players matter more. Like, coaches can definitely inhibit players. They can definitely build them up, but ultimately it comes down to the eliteness of the actual athlete and what they can overcome and how they lead and raise players up. But a player like Baker, I think we can really look historically about how much coaching maybe does matter. And you look at his college career, where he got his best potential output and winning the Heisman was playing for Lincoln Riley. Then he goes to the pros. There's a carousel of coaches at Cleveland. He goes to the Panthers, same thing. Matt Rule fired midseason. He's injured. Then he gets Steve Wilkes as a defensive mind. He had kind of moved on already at that point. Well, now he's with Sean McVay, arguably one of the best coaches in football, arguably one of the best quarterback coaches in football. I mean, did great things with Jared Goff, won a Super Bowl in his first year with Matthew Stafford. And then now we can see what he can do in 5 weeks with Baker Mayfield. So I think that too will help harness that, because we've seen Sean McVay do it with his other quarterbacks. Now, both quarterbacks were on the other side, being very even-keeled, kind of emotionless, very cool and calm and collective. Baker's very different, so we'll see how they mesh together. But this is definitely a great opportunity for both coach and player to epitomize kind of what we want to see between a coach and a quarterback. So I think that'll be a lot of fun.
I think, Ryan, on that point, just quickly, I think this is another opportunity and another nuance for McVay to feel like he can come back next year, because this is a different quarterback than he's really interacted with the Rams. And I think if you feel like he can break through with Baker and unlock some things that were missing in Baker's career, NFL career, the last few years, and help Baker, not just necessarily with the Rams, but find a starting job elsewhere, given what the Rams' plans may or may not be. And if he kind of goes through that relationship and really sees the impact that he has on Baker, in addition to having some of these dramatic wins at the end of the year, that kind of breakthrough lets you know what? I still enjoy this process. I still enjoy bringing value to people and helping them unlock their potential, and I want to give it another run.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're out of time. I think we both think the Rams are going to win this one. I'll just give my score. I think 23-17 Rams take it in Lambeau. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. This is the LA Football Show. Have a blessed weekend. Enjoy the football. We'll be back next week to get back into it right before the Christmas holiday and have some fun Christmas stuff I think we got planned we're going to do. So everyone have a great weekend. For Jamal Madney, I'm Ryan Dyrud. Talk to y'all next week.
You're listening to the LA Football Podcast.